So much of these conversations are conversations that I have been having. I don't know. Some of them are recent and some of them are like 25 years old. And the context of them is on, disrupting our certainty so that we can gain clarity. And another one is really evaluating the quality of human thinking, particularly in context of machine thinking. And we're not here saying machine thinking is bad. Both of us use AI. We love it. It's an awesome tool. But also, there is absolute atrophy happening in the human brain, mind, critical thinking, a dependency that's happening. And so, as we are investigating these topics and kind of disrupting our certainty around them, what's underneath that, what's driving that, is to reveal how important it is to practice our critical thinking, our analysis, and in the human ways that we do that, not in the machine ways. That's something different. So how can we continue to develop the skill of human thinking right alongside our use of machine tools?
We're talking about the use of age, how it links to judgments, and how that judgment isn't all that accurate. It's built into our culture as an evaluation tool.
So much of human decision intelligence work is evaluating how we're conditioned. There's positive conditioning, and there's negative conditioning. So much of negative conditioning happens, not always, but sometimes inside the heuristics that we build, create, accept. And heuristics are just shortcuts for trying to get to some truth that makes it easy on us. And a lot of heuristics are intelligent. Heuristics aren't bad, but they generally need to change and grow as the intelligence, data, and information changes and expands or contracts, right? So age is something that I found is a very strong and powerful heuristic in societies. And particularly I can speak to my own, but I think even in other societies, how there's a hierarchy there, how there's expectations there, how there are beliefs and judgments. But there is a way that we use age to navigate ourselves. There's a way that we use age to navigate others, personally, socially, in every context. And to be clear, I have no problem with my age. Many people, as I bring up the topic of age, they'll automatically assume, and here's another problem, there's a little sexism involved. Because I'm a woman bringing up age, there's an assumption that I have some difficulty or challenge or shame or something with my own age. And that's not it. I actually don't like knowing anyone else's age. It's not about my age. I mean, it's in there, but it's about anyone's age. I do not want to know how old anyone is unless they are under 26. And the only reason I say that is because the brain isn't fully developed until we're 26. So if we are younger than 26, age matters. So it's a literal developmental thing that is pretty consistent and a little bit more fixed compared to any other age where some people develop and some people don't. And it doesn't really have much to do with their age, in my observation. And so the invitation here is to really consider, what are the ways in which we're evaluating others and ourselves based on this metric? And how accurate is it actually? And what is it that we're looking for? Like, what kind of accuracy are we looking for? The reason why I say this last piece is I'm not interested in evaluating a typical normal human being. So the majority of humanity, different factors and realities around age might apply more. I still think it's not very accurate for everyone, but what I'm interested in personally is finding very atypical people like myself, not necessarily looking at normal metrics or normal people or the way that people are kind of going through their life motions and how that ends up to add up in more typical ways. I'm interested in, and this is the context. So if someone who's listening isn't interested in the same things I am, well, there's still something to consider here, taking away about how age as a metric isn't super accurate. But it's particularly not accurate if you're interested in atypical humans that are a little bit more unusual. And what I like about this is, in terms of human decision intelligence, it's looking for different data to actually find a certain qualitative difference. So as I approach the world and the people that I want to work with and the people that I'm friends with, I'm interested in looking for exceptional characteristics. How does one find those exceptional characteristics if we're using heuristics that actually eliminate all of that data, that aren't looking for that, aren't noticing that, and aren't putting people and funneling people in to places that are typical structures with atypical people? We have a problem now, right? And this is similar to the algorithms for hiring people, right? We have these systems and structures that you can put into machines and they're looking for certain things. And if those certain things become standardized, well, then what happens is people who might be even more exceptionally suited for that job will get kicked out because they don't fit the standardized metrics, even though they're actually more able to do that job. So it's similar with age. What kind of algorithms are we using that are actually cutting us off from something better that we don't know because we're trying to eliminate the negative, or we're trying to make something easy on ourselves, or we're reducing something so it becomes more manageable? And all of these efforts towards efficiency and speed, our algorithms are developed to be more efficient and to sort the bad. But what they're not doing is they're not making room for that which is exceptional. So you're limiting yourself to this middle ground of the very standardized, normal, typical people. This is what we're looking for. This is how one would respond, all under normal circumstances. This I found is a problem, and we can unpack more about what that means inside of age.
Yeah, it's the median, right? That most people in this chapter of life that's tied to this decade of their life have similar experiences, similar needs, similar values. You could think about it even from like a marketing perspective. If you're looking at a demographic, there's inherent beliefs that we have about that demographic, how they travel, where they eat, what they spend on. And then what you're saying is that you're not looking for people who kind of fit in the middle. When you're evaluating people, you're using different criteria. And so age becomes not even irrelevant, but could take you to an elimination factor.
When I threw out the age factor, what I was forced to do was to really look for different data and to know what it was that I was interested in. So if I was thinking about how old is this person and they seemed like they were in their 20s, the question was, why do I want to know how old? Am I going to have a different experience of this person if I knew they were 26 versus 36? Would that change my experience of them? How would I evaluate my interactions with them? Would I let them off the hook and be a little bit less intelligent, or would I expect more of them? Right? We want to make sense of people's intelligence. We want to make sense of their lack of intelligence. We want to make sense of their success or lack of success, right? Like age is a big heuristic for sense making. But when I dropped all that, I realized, wow, those things don't really matter. Like, what other variables came into my mind of like, oh, what is their character? Or how is this person navigating something different than success, or something different than a particular point of maturity? And what I've found over the years for myself is that almost everyone in my life breaks the age heuristic. Like no one fits within their age. And I love that. And also I started to evaluate, oh, what are our assumptions around age? Like, for example, are older people who have more life experience, are they actually more wise? Are they actually more patient? Are older people fundamentally have some additive that is really valuable? And I couldn't find a consistency. And actually, the older people they get more fixed, they get less patient, they become sometimes less expansive in their view. Oftentimes, they're not aware of things socially or tech or in science or even culture. They're less tuned in. So they actually don't have as much data to interact and to actually evaluate what they're thinking against what's actually happening in the world and what's relevant. And then also young people. Are young people inherently less wise because they don't have life experience? And that was not my experience. I actually was able to realize some of my 20-something-year-old friends had far more wisdom than some of my 60-year-old friends, and they had a fraction of life experience. Why was that? Where was their wisdom coming from? I don't want to negate that. Life experience is something, it's not nothing. And there are certain things about life that we can only learn with enough experience. But then there's also this other kind of wisdom of like, do I have to try heroin to know that it's bad for me? Do I have to have that life experience in order to gain that knowledge? No. There are certain things that we can suss out based on other factors and come to really good conclusions and to have a lot of wisdom around, even if we've never experienced being an addict, or if we've never experienced being, some of these extreme things in life, like, I don't know, being an underwater worker or being a sex worker. Do these people have a certain kind of wisdom from their extreme life experiences? Yes. But do they also have other blind spots because of those extreme situations? Yes. So how does that map out in terms of if we're evaluating maturity, if we're evaluating wisdom? And I think even in a romantic space, like I've known way more mature, emotionally available, and emotionally intelligent young men than I have met older men. Where does that come from? I mean, obviously, it has nothing to do with age.
It sounds like the people that you are talking about kind of living the typical kind of status quo, whatever you might expect or assume from someone that age, that in a way they have succumbed to the age they are. And they're just playing out our culture's expectations for the age. And I think about that not just in the early chapters of life, like child rearing and working and certain development, like owning a home, all of these things, positive things in 20s and 30s. But I really think about as people get older and it starts to become an excuse that people don't do things because, and that's primarily where I hear age come up. I'm too old for that. And there are real ties to mobility and health, but we also know that 80-year-olds can run marathons. And again, those are the extreme cases. And so at what point do people become a product of their age, letting their age actually guide their ideologies or their beliefs about who they are, what they can do, their capabilities, the ability to take risks, their ability to try new experiences, etc.
Yeah, and to further that, it's that this heuristic, because it's such a deep place of conditioning socially, humans live into what we speak to each other about age. So if we say you're too young for that, you're too old for that, and this happens a lot more with women, of course, around certain things, but men too, right? In terms of their status or how they make money. I'm making broad generalizations here, but even just like what we wear, like many people will look at a woman and say, "Oh, you're too old to dress like that." Or you're too young to dress like that, right? Like, but in any of these places where we have age related appropriateness or some kind of age rule, speaking that over and over is what people end up believing is true. But then you have some of the most kind of amazing, interesting people who don't dress their age. Like, who made that rule? What is an age dress like anyway? And why has that become a judgment, a negative judgment if somebody isn't dressing their age? What does that mean to dress like an age? Like, that's kind of ridiculous. It's not super intelligent. So, I mean, that's just a silly example. But what I've noticed when I started playing around with this is that I am significantly older than what I look. And I love playing with this because what happens is I can be around younger people and they don't really know how old I am. Sometimes they assume I'm their same age, sometimes they don't. But what I like is when they don't know how old I am, I'm able to position myself as a learner from them and able to ask them questions. And they're very comfortable because they don't know my age. And I look enough close to their age is that they will give me their unfiltered thoughts and they'll engage me as an equal. And the knowledge that I gain from that is high. And I love that. And it flips the script. And I think that's a huge social barrier that we're not tuned into, is like, oh, there's a hierarchy here, that age plays a significant role. And in many ways, I found becomes its own character that is primarily negative in my observation. And I think that people aren't thinking about this. They're not aware because it's so baked in. And I think it's so fun to play with because then I can't use that for them or against them, that metric. And I want to be clear here and say there are places that age matter. So I don't want to over index on eliminating age entirely. The point here is how we're using age as a heuristic when it mostly is inaccurate, and how we navigate one another based on a kind of strange hierarchical or rule-based thing based on a number of how many years a person's lived.
When you were talking about the point of flipping the script and the fact that without knowing age either way, you're able to gain so much from people. This has been one of the truest experiences in my life that I can put age aside. And when you talked about being a peer, like if others are able to see you as a peer, they're able to engage you as a peer. And this opens up an entirely new dialogue that was once kind of off limits to engage in that way. The same goes for the opposite way. That, I mean, using filters on Snapchat with my 96-year-old grandmother, there was a way that she could engage the world in new ways by leveraging the knowledge of generations behind her.
I know many older people who are super fucking sharp and very tuned in to technological advances and very comfortable comfortable with all of these new tech tools. And even though that isn't the majority, that's the point. I'm interested in finding the people who are not living according to a fucking age. There is a way to live and exist and have intelligence intergenerationally, where I'm not stuck in a generation. I'm not stuck in my age. I really am fascinated by the references and by the values and the priorities of each generation. And I'm interested in understanding all of them. And what I love about that is that it's naturally made me ageless, for a lack of a better word. Like, I don't really fit into an age. People can't tell, and I can't tell. And I think that's what's interesting about being more expansive. And again, I'm not afraid of my age. I don't really care. That's the point. I don't care. It's not a thing. It's not something that is important enough to identify with. And in this conversation around heuristics, and in this conversation around intelligence and human intelligence, what is a hope and a natural consequence of being an expansive person is we no longer identify with particulars. And what we found in our work in human decision intelligence, that gives a huge advantage because it expands our growth, it expands our perspective, it provides a kind of humility in whatever perspective we're in, that there are other perspectives that we need to seek, and that there's opportunities to learn and continually position ourselves as learners and leaders simultaneously, but how it creates a kind of relationship with our environment that is less fixed, and where we're not going to these algorithmic thinking as often. And again, there are places for prescription. There are places for algorithms that are really useful. But as a daily way of being, it's been so fun for people to really not know and eventually not care how old people are, because it doesn't actually signify anything.
Yeah, you stop asking the question, would a 46-year-old do this? Or would a 65-year-old start a business? Or how old is too old to go skateboarding? As we're thinking through a decision, we factor in our stage of life, i.e., age, as one of the ways to probe society to see if it's acceptable. I have known a lot of people who are well into their 50s and 60s and have never left their state or worked in the same company for 30 years, or things that were very stable and consistent throughout their life compared to diverse experiences. So the question I'm going to pose around the amount of life experience you have, again, that's framed not with an age, but amount of life experiences and the ability to trace patterns or notice patterns.
Traveling is a perfect example. I mean, how many people do we know, especially Americans, white Americans can travel all the time, and they're not actually engaging in the cultures. They're going to resorts. They're not actually studying the place that they're at. They're not engaging with the local people. They're not even staying in local places that much. Or when they are, they're being very tourist in their mindset. And they're going shopping and being very high consumers. And so, not that you can't gain experience and knowledge of that, but it's going to be limited compared to somebody who maybe travels way less. But when they do, they're fully present in a different way, and they're integrating into that culture, and their curiosity is present. And they're asking questions, and they're not just asking questions about the culture, but they're evaluating their own culture compared to this one, or their own experiences of like, oh, what does this feel like for me? Why does it feel this way? Why is it different? What am I seeing here? And that is a different quality of learning and engaging in our humanity and our self-development. And I don't think this is age-based.
I think that's great. So you would debunk the fact that 80 years on this planet allows you to trace patterns in a way that's different from a 27-year-old who's consumed books and read and studied history and understands what there is to be gained from the decades that preceded them, regardless of living through them.
I definitely wouldn't be so binary about that. I think that they're not identical. And an 80-year-old person, let's say, who has fallen in love many times and has experienced the death of a best friend or a mate, is going to be different than a 27-year-old who hasn't fallen in love and experienced death. That's true. But I don't think that's based on age. It's difficult to not gain wisdom when one suffers. So I think that maybe the common denominator is suffering. Usually, the people, no matter how old they are, if they have suffered, they have an intelligence and a wisdom that most people say is beyond their years. We know some children who grew up with cancer, And their suffering has made them incredibly wise in abnormal ways, equal to some 40-year-olds. And we do see this regularly. This isn't like an aberration. This is a regular thing. So I think suffering is something that we can look at as a metric. The depth of a human soul is usually dependent on the quality of their self-reflection or the skills and capacity around intimacy. Can they engage another with depth and transparency and vulnerability? Those things aren't age-based. And we know this. We know 60-year-olds that are incredibly avoidant and have major intimacy issues. Meanwhile, we can look at a 35-year-old that doesn't. That is the point of consideration, is what are the measurements or the factors or the realities that develops one's intelligence and that develops one's character. And I don't think that it's typically around age, even though, yes, sometimes there is no substitute for time. But I don't think it's time itself is my distinction. I don't think it's like, oh, if somebody's given 80 years, they're automatically wise. No, I think if somebody's given 80 years and they're self-reflective and they're engaged in humanity and they've suffered, yeah, they're going to have a lot more to offer.
It's not time itself, it's what you do at that time. And so surely time will present new opportunities to integrate experiences into who you are on your path towards becoming. But if you don't choose to make use of the suffering, or you avoid it, or you don't actually engage in different activities or experiences throughout your life, then you can end up stunted and less mature. And it doesn't actually have to do with the external experiences as well. Like, I have a best friend in her 20s, and she is extremely wise, and we connect on deeper levels. Our ability to have conversations that are way deeper than surface level, it's just extraordinary. This is something I've really gained out of ripping the band-aid off of age and not judging her. She's not a mentee of mine, right? Like, we're peers, and that has established a foundation in our relationship where we can consider ideas in new ways, and she can bring new forms of intelligence to me.
That is exactly the result that has naturally occurred from eliminating age. And to further that example, I have a 12-year-old nephew, and ever since he was young, I have been treating him like a peer in certain conversations. Obviously, he's young. He has to listen to me. And there is a definite hierarchy, again, when we're talking about people who are particularly young. But there's an element here that's an example of, because there's certain moments inside context that I have considered him an absolute peer, that I have said, Paladin, teach me about this. Like, I noticed that you have had a certain thought process around this decision. How did you come to that decision? And there's certain philosophical things that I've asked him, and to engage with me as a peer. I haven't looked at him to teach him. I've actually looked at him to learn from him. And he's fucking delivered. And it's been so fun to actually experience that even when age does matter, there are still moments that I can absolutely approach him and navigate with him as an absolute peer. That there are things this little man can teach me, and to be looking for that and to be approaching that, rather than have this concrete heuristic that is embedded in our conditioning that with young people, particularly, right, with actual young people, that we see them as, okay, we need to position ourselves to be a good influence or to help guide them. Of course, we do that too. But there's also an approach that there are moments where, whoa, what happens if I give him permission and give him authority to speak into my life, or to speak into my beliefs, or to teach me something? And it's been really, really fun. And what that has done is it's created a different kind of relationship that most adults don't have with 12-year-olds. And to make a point of this is that that's really different. And being able to not look at somebody who is 12 and see that they're only 12. And I think that's really funny to consider that. And especially as we're in grade school, like, our whole identity is around our age. You ask a kid, and, it's one of the things that I love doing is making a 12-year-old and say, oh, you just turned 10. Oh my God. And they're 12. And it's like, you've just destroyed their life. And they get angry. It's, I'm not 10, Auntie Coco. I am 12. And it's like, and it kind of points to something in our society, or maybe in our biology, that is a huge, powerful fixation around age and what that means. And I think that's also an example of, like, oh, kids know this. Kids know that age is a thing. And it's a very important thing. And so I don't think we have really evolved from that once we get older.
I'm really curious if we had to like completely go back in time and enter the minds of those who haven't considered this and who are thinking about age as a really useful metric to evaluate maturity, knowledge, wisdom, experience, all of these things. Where did this seed get planted? Where along the path did we link age to all these factors that produce outcomes?
Well, I think I mean, that's a complicated question, but one, it's a hierarchy for order and respect. Like in ancient times, age was about maintaining and establishing order and respect in a family and society. And then also because they're generalities that end up being true, particularly if you're under 26.
Or particularly if you fall in the median, where you're living into the things prescribed by the time of your life.
Yeah, and I think that the heuristics around age are particularly useful when your brain isn't developed yet. So when you're under 26, those stages of development are pretty accurate, more or less, and certainly important because the brain is developed. And I do think that if there's a social expectation that people get married, at what stage they should get married, based on what values, beliefs, structures, when they should start having children, when they should start being successful. This is all, social structures that are in place based on social ideals. Who said that had to be, right? I mean, and we're actually confronting those in modern society. We're confronting certain things that we've always done as a society, and we're asking ourselves, wait, why do we have to do that? Like, why does everybody have to have children? Why, if you're not somebody who has children, why are you devalued in society? Or if you're not partnered or whatever. I mean, the list goes on and on. But how we generally measure the stages of advancement or change, like the stages of human life change, we mark that in age.
It's disserving us because let's say you had all these expectations for where you wanted to be by the time you were 30 or 40, or when you retire, all of these different kind of milestones that we experience in life. And that really sets us up potentially for a mismatch. First of all, because it's an arbitrary metric. And then the other thing is like the criteria that we're measuring success with. So this is like a perfect storm brewing to set people up for a real crisis potentially.
Well, and I think we see that happening a lot around how the self-judgment around, not being successful by a certain age or whatever. Now, I mean, to be fair, there are certain things biologically that are pretty fixed around age. But even then, one to another, it's like some women, lose their fertility at 35, others lose their fertility at 50. That's a pretty big spread.
Mhm.
So in general, we can make a median. Okay, so having babies is a thing. There's a biological kind of fixedness around that. Death is generally, pretty fixed. But even then, some people, would die at 60, some people die at 100. So it's kind of a big window there around death, right?
Mhm.
So, and also dying isn't the same as death. Some people start dying at 50,
Mhm.
versus others start dying at 70 in terms of disease or whatever. So, obviously there are some places around age that are important and do matter. But even within those areas, there's still a big window of
Yeah.
variation from individual to individual.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm thinking about putting this into practice in life and like how to avoid sharing your age and mostly how to avoid knowing someone else's age. So the things that come to mind are certain like culture references, like certain songs, especially if they're tied to a specific time in your life. And also LinkedIn, like if you put graduation dates or a resume with graduation dates where people can deduct your age. So, how do you navigate the predominant focus on age, both ways, both in wanting to know your age and also you happening to stumble across other people's age quite easily? How do you navigate that?
Well, it is a challenge. I mean, the first place to start is just being really clear that I don't want to know, and not looking for it. And then if it's brought up, to dismiss it very easily unless it's important. Like, again, in certain contexts it's important. But oftentimes people will tell, people how old they are. I tend to be very quick to not hear and to dismiss that information and then let people know I don't want to know. So please don't tell me how old you are anymore. I don't want to know.
Why do you think people want to tell you their age? What are the couple of the reasons that are driving that?
I mean, people share their age for all different kinds of reasons, but I think mostly It's something that's habituated because it's a place we self identify. So it's not conscious. I mean, sometimes it's conscious. Some people are bragging because of a certain age, 30 under 30 or whatever. And this is the thing that I'm addressing. And I think human decision intelligence addresses is what are you identifying with in a powerful way that you're not conscious or you're not that consciously aware of? And what are the potential downsides? And maybe what are the upsides? But I don't think there's a big upside to identifying with an age.
How have you found that not identifying with your age and intentionally not seeking out or remembering other people's age has become protective?
For me, I found that I get judged in any direction because people can't tell how old I am. So they'll either think that I'm way younger, and that could cause problems because then I'm seen as more arrogant or something because I don't have the age behind me to solidify my confidence. Or if people don't know how old I am and they're, maybe judging me as around my age, I think it would sometimes help.
But you're
I don't know. I
unwilling to
don't
give it as a tool for them.
I still think it's a problem because either way, if one is identifying with an age, it becomes fixed in other person's mind. It doesn't matter how I frame it. This heuristic is so strong, which is the point that I'm making. It's so strong, and that's what I am offering is to just consider as you're walking around in your life every day and in your work, how much age is coming into the perspective, your perspective, other people's perspective, how often you're curious about it, how often one references it for themselves. I would say that the smarter we become, which let's assume happens the longer that we live, many things become easier in our future, not more difficult. So, for example, at 20 years old, not having the intelligence and not having the skills and capacity, certain decisions and certain instances took a lot of energy and effort to navigate because there wasn't skill and there wasn't intelligence. Now, fast forward 20, 30 years later, that same situation is really easy. It doesn't
Yeah, and
actually
people don't
require a
say,
lot of
I'm too
energy.
young for this when they're engaging this kind of cognition. It's only the other way around.
Exactly. And that's actually an interesting point.
And also, people are not just living longer, but they're healthy and engaged and connected in different ways, I think, in these days than ever before.
Yeah. I mean, there's multiple truths here. And I'm not going to deny that time has a weight, that age is a thing. I just don't think it's nearly to the degree that people are assuming or accepting. And that is the invitation, is to actually really examine this. Like, are people who have more life experience actually more intelligent? And I think that in a domain of expertise, maybe. But even then, you can look at people who've had 40 years of experience in the same domain as somebody who's had 10 years of experience. Oftentimes that time gap, you're going to have both of those people bring something totally different that I would say is equally valuable. So that's the point, is that age isn't the thing that we should really be evaluating. We should be evaluating the particular intelligence that exists at any age and how that can map to certain generalities, but even more importantly, how it doesn't map at all. If I were to imagine a future, it would be that where young people wouldn't feel weird leading older people. People wouldn't feel weird being led by younger people. And there was much more a partnership because we're not over indexing on age and hierarchy. We're really respecting the different kinds of intelligence. And this is where it absolutely goes back to human decision intelligence. And what I just think is so important is that we stop using limiting categories and limiting identifications, especially when they're not extremely accurate or they're not extremely accurate for the future, for something more excellent, or for something that has a different kaleidoscope of values. So maybe in the past, this heuristic around age was more effective and useful. I think that in the future, it's going to be less effective and less useful. And especially if we're looking to become something more exceptional, to surround ourselves with that was more exceptional. And we'll say not even exceptionalism, but let's just say being more intelligent in the resources that we have in each other. So if humans are indeed, and human intelligence is indeed a resource that is going to be valuable, then how are we going to more accurately assess that intelligence? And I don't think it's by using underdeveloped reductionary heuristics.